This is one of those video games, alongside the likes of Killer 7 and Ocarina of Time, where the video is not going to be entirely objective. They're never gonna be. Because not only do I have such a deep sense of nostalgia for it, but it's also one of the best games that I've ever played. I first played it somewhere around 2002, 2003, not long after it came out. Fun Dark Numenori, in fact. When I was younger, I was not allowed to play M-rated games, so the entirety of this game was played at a friend's house. I'm sure that I will touch on that again at some point. Many aspects of my life were not necessarily changed by this game, but definitely influenced. I always hear people say, such and such changed my life. And while I'm generally annoyed by that platitude, part of me sympathizes, understands that sentiment wholeheartedly. That part is the part that remembers playing Eternal Darkness for the first time. I honestly don't even know where to start, the game or how it influenced me. I guess for the sake of the video and everyone's sanity, let's set the scene. First of all, the game begins with this quote from Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven.
Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting.
Which is badass. Honestly, I was already sold at this point. You play as Alexandra Roivas, who is woken from a nightmare with a call from the police informing her that her grandfather Edward has been found, brutally murdered. In fact, once you get there, the police make it known they don't have a clue as to how it could have happened, with all the doors locked, no sign of forced entry, or why it was so brutal. He's like literally just a lump of flesh. You identify him by his ring that's sticking out from underneath the cloth. So after the setup exposition, you find yourself alone in his Rhode Island mansion 2 weeks later, after identifying the aforementioned lump, and begin to explore, determined to solve your grandfather's murder. I love the beginning of this game because it does a good job of slowly introducing the mechanics of the game, exploring, hinting at the types of puzzles you'll encounter, but without necessarily an explicit tutorial. It's a great use of the show, don't tell feature of great media that many games don't quite get right. While searching for clues, you come across a secret passageway that leads to Edward's equally secret study. And what do you know? It seems like there may be a great deal about your grandfather that you didn't know. It is here, in the study, you find
the Tome of Eternal Darkness.
Sorry, the Tome of Eternal Darkness. It's just your average run-of-the-mill book bound in human skin, so, no big deal. This is where the real meat of the story comes into play. As you open it and start reading like any sensible person upon finding a book bound in human skin, you're taken back to ancient Persia, 26 BC, where you take control of a Roman centurion named Pius Augustus. This scene is so cool, they even speak Latin, and then it slowly turns into English.
Si inceptum conficiamus.
Quam primum, Centurio Augustus. I would like to compliment you once more on your battle tactics. Our enemies did not have a chance.
I remember being very impressed by that. I also vividly remember sitting in my computer class freshman year, browsing the internet, which we weren't supposed to do, for news about Eternal Darkness and the Resident Evil remake. They came out the same year, and I was super into GameCube. I was doing those things instead of what I was supposed to be doing, but it doesn't. Well, moving on. This sets up the big bad of the story and the course your journey will take. The game consists of alternating levels between playing out chapters of the Tome of Eternal Darkness and exploring the mansion for more chapters of the book. You gain access to different parts of the mansion as you go, the more chapters you find. Each chapter you find is concerning a person connected to the tome in some way. You end up playing as some of Alex's ancestors, Maximilian
May the rats eat your eyes!
Roivas was a standout. Still probably my favorite character / chapter. And some other individuals that fought against the darkness over the centuries. And of course, mild spoiler alert, you find out that you're part of it as well. One of the craziest things about this game is the inclusion of sanity effects. It was actually so unique a feature that Nintendo patented it. As you play, you'll encounter horrific enemies. Each time you do, the longer they stay alive, the longer your character is in contact with them, the more sanity your character loses. The camera slowly starts to tilt as your sanity drains until it's at a pretty disorienting angle once it's fully depleted. In the background, you can hear distorted weeping and moaning. It's actually pretty disturbing. And then things get a little nuts. There's really way too many to include in this video, but I'll list a few effects that I remember encountering. Bugs crawling across the screen. Input changes so you can hear your character dying, but you can't see it. When you go to save, it says erasing save data. The controller stops working. Your character will just start to sink into the floor. You walk through a door and end up in a closed room with no exit and no weapon. When you use a spell, your character just explodes. It says to be continued, like the game is over, and cuts to a screen that teases a sequel, Eternal Darkness: Sanity's Redemption, which now, with the curse of hindsight, hurts the most. That's just to name a few. I mean, there's a ton of them. There's a whole bunch of scary things that can happen to you in this game. And when you're in the mansion with low sanity, pictures on the wall and things that you read, that you interact with, the flavor text, turn into nightmarish versions of what they used to be. And I know these days, the horror genre, survival horror especially, has come very far back from the old games of Resident Evil and such. We've had Penumbra and Amnesia and Outlast and Dead Space and stuff like that. Now the Resident Evil 2 remake and the Resident Evil 3 remake. But back then, we had horror games, obviously. But this was the first horror game that I ever played. I had seen people play Resident Evil and Silent Hill, but as far as personally playing them, this was my first experience. And hearkening back to my eluded, sheltered upbringing, I did not have much experience with horror movies or horror games at this point in my life. So it was especially effective. My heart would be pounding. The sanity effects would legitimately mess with me. Once I was playing as Maximilian, and I walked into a bedroom while exploring the mansion, and one of the servants started walking towards me, weirdly. So I thought that they were taken over by a bone thief, which is one of the monsters in the game. Now understand, this had happened before in a different chapter, and the servant was possessed, so I was rightly on edge. So I killed them. They were not possessed. It was just a servant, just walking around. Whoops, my bad. Sometimes I kill servants. My nerves were frayed, and I was paranoid. I could only play like a level at a time, and my friend would constantly make fun of me because I would save every couple minutes, which made the erasing save data sanity effect particularly effective for me. The joke was ultimately on him, though, because he wouldn't save and would frequently have to replay entire levels. Ha! But I loved it. I loved being on edge, which is funny because most survival horror games nowadays give me way too much anxiety. Say what you will, hypothetical hecklers, these horror games today do the same thing that this game did to me 17 years ago. And I'm a horror fan. I've seen movies that would make sensible people cover their eyes, run away and hide, or just vomit. But games? I am the when it comes to horror games. I think I made it 20 minutes into Outlast and then just nope, right out of that. I played Amnesia until the first time the monster came after me, so I hid in a cabinet and I quit the game and I uninstalled it. It's that first-person horror with no weapon that is just not my cup of tea. My point is, this game could be genuinely terrifying when you got sucked into it. Another really cool mechanic in the game is magic, spelled with a K, so you know they're not messing around. As you play, you find runes and then string them together to form spells. These can be used to restore health, sanity, enchant weapons, etc. It's actually a fairly detailed system, as you need specific runes for certain spells, and you couple them with power runes and binding runes, etc. I vaguely remember just messing around with rune combinations and discovering spells without explicitly learning them from the game. I always thought that was actually pretty awesome, considering it's a fairly simple and straightforward game otherwise. Segue to new topic, the music. Oh, I can still conjure up nightmares associated with certain tracks. They were just so unsettling. It did such a good job of creating an atmosphere of tension and dread, which is another reason the horror was so good. Honestly, I think the sound design and music scared me more than the actual monsters in the game. Think of the efficacy of the sound design for something like Dead Space, which I somehow managed to get through. I think it might be third person with a weapon that I can do. So much hinges on the background sounds, the scratching, the clattering coming from ventilation shafts. You never knew when an enemy was going to jump out and attack you. The background of Eternal Darkness is filled with dark, atmospheric music and whispering voices. It takes your fears and never lets them diffuse throughout the whole experience. Even when you're not fighting anything, it's the fear of what could happen. There are periods of silent exploration in the Dark Mansion, with only the ominous, rhythmic drumming in the background, punctuated by a sudden rush of whispering voices and eerie music. And sometimes it's just the sound of rain and creaking doors, ticking clocks, or your own echoing footsteps. In some of the temple levels, a simple popping torch was enough to make me jump out of my skin. It's just so darn effective. I don't want to give too much away as far as the actual story is concerned because you really should experience it for yourself. It's very well done, very cool, and tells a grand tale of cosmic horror. Which leads us to the influence. There's a word I would use to describe the story, the horror, really every aspect of this game, and that would be Lovecraftian. Deriving from the influences of H.P. Lovecraft. The reason I haven't used it until now was because I learned about Lovecraft from this game. Now, anyone who knows me in real life knows how significant this is. Early on, when you're exploring the mansion, you find a pile of books next to an easy chair. And if you interact with it, the flavor text mentions the writings of Poe and Lovecraft, the art of Bosch, and the poetry of Blake. I remember stopping and saying to my friend, I know Edgar Allan Poe, I know the art of Hieronymus Bosch and William Blake, but who is this other guy, Lovecraft? Never heard of that. The words now echo forward in time, across the gulf of 17 years to a much older Dark Numenorian, whose life has been unfathomably influenced by the greatest practitioner of modern horror the 20th century ever knew. This led me to doing some research, which, as a quick aside, let me just say, I think the people that come down on video games as being a waste of time or a lesser form of art, or not art at all, are completely wrong. In fact, I ended up learning more about World War I by playing Battlefield 1 and then doing my own research than I ever remember learning in school. That topic could honestly be its own video, and it might be someday. It wasn't long at all before Lovecraft became an obsession of mine. My good friend and I were really cool in high school, so we would hang out at our local Borders bookstore. Rest in peace, sweet prince. And while there, I bought literally every Lovecraft book they had in stock. To put it lightly, I ate that up. I read through every story, every poem, not quite every letter. Okay, I've only read a few of his letters and essays, and he was quite crazy and more than a little racist. He had some issues. That's a topic for a different video. I watched documentaries about him, really delved into his mythos, His writing style and subject matter informed the way I write and what I write about. Nearly everything I've written owes in large part to the legacy of H.P. Lovecraft. I have Cthulhu shirts, bobblehead, H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society stickers, Christmas albums, radio dramas, movies, etc. Hell, if I don't use Dark Numenorian as my username, it's Lovecraft410. All of this cultural influence I owe to a throwaway line of flavor text in Eternal Darkness. And of course, in part to my own unstoppable curiosity. Which is why it must be my favorite game. Even though others compete for the title, and many are better games, but no other game introduced me to Lovecraft. And that's a big frickin' deal. So the first place slot on my list belongs to Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem. Once you really dive into his writing, you realize just how much of this game is pure Lovecraft. From the Rhode Island setting, to Inspector Legros, to the more notable aspects of horror on a cosmic scale. While the game does have plenty to do with magic, and that doesn't really play into Lovecraft's fiction as much, although invocation and summoning do, it's the nature of the unseen forces beyond our comprehension that really shines through. There's even a quote in the game.
The universe is a yawning chasm filled with emptiness and the puerile meanderings of sentience.
Which just reminds me so much of this Lovecraft quote. We live on a placid island of ignorance amidst black seas of infinity. Not everything is exactly lifted from him, but the sentiment is 100% H.P. Lovecraft. And ever since I've played it, I've wanted more. Desperately craved more story, more gameplay, set in this universe, expanding on this lore, telling new stories about other characters that fought the darkness. There was even a Kickstarter that I backed way back in 2013 for a sequel or a spiritual successor called Shadow of the Eternals. But it never came to fruition. I think it never reached its goal, or it was just canceled. I was pretty heartbroken about that. I even vowed to buy a Wii U for the sole purpose of playing this game, because it was supposed to come out on that console. There was scandal and controversy surrounding some member of Silicon Knights, and that bogged things down. So I do fear we may never return to this IP, but I would throw so much money at a HD remaster of this game for Switch. Good lord. Not even a second thought. I'd pre-order whatever overpriced Ultimate Edition that they'd put out, but alas, I dream. And as the game says, after a brush with the ancients, our dreams metamorphosize into nightmares. Thank you so much for stopping by. I genuinely hope you enjoyed yourself. If you did, drop a like or a comment. Let me know if you've ever played the game. If you're a fan of Lovecraft, tell me what your favorite story is. Love to hear it. I am the Dark Numenorian, and until next time, keep gaming, keep rocking, and thanks for watching.